Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here, and can I just welcome you all and just to say that the report being launched today is the culmination of a priority issue for the committee in the last term, and I want to welcome our committee members, Deputy Catherine Byrne, Deputy Caoimhín O'Quillan, next to me here is Senator Ginny Van Turnout, Senator Colin Burke, Deputy Sandra McClellan, who are with us. And can I just also welcome people who are watching at home on Oireachtas TV and on the Oireachtas webcast. You are very welcome as well. Today is a very important day because it is about not just sports people, but it's about people involved in every part of life, because we all think that concussion just applies to sport. It doesn't, as we all know. Our report is 43 pages long. There are a number of key recommendations, and I think it is essential that we as a committee held a piece of work and a body of work around the issue of concussion in sport. And I want to, at the beginning, thank the medical experts, the sporting organisations and the brain injury advocates who made oral and written presentations to our committee, and they were very engaged, very active and very cooperative and helpful to us in our work. And I think it is important that we do stress that the issue of concern about player welfare, player safety, and the risks from sports-related head injuries have become more and more prevalent and have reached into every parish and community and into many homes. And those of us who are involved in sport will know that our whole attitude to how we look after ourselves as players, and in particular young people, has changed for the better. And that is to be welcomed. And I say that as somebody who spent 6 years as chair of my own club, and the welfare of players is very important. And I'm glad to say that we as an Oireachtas address the issue, but also the sporting organisations have taken the issue seriously and have been very proactive in how they have dealt with and how they deal with the issue of concussion in sport. Internationally, there has been a long focus and a long-term impact on repeat concussion, in particular around the area of elite players. And we're becoming, all of us that is, acutely aware of the risks posed by undiagnosed concussion for amateur and school athletes, particularly from second impact syndrome. The recent media commentary, as I said, has focused on the health repercussions from dramatic changes in how our contact sports are played from a very young age. And the development includes, more intense training regimes, faster paced games, increased number of head-on tackles in contact sports. And one of the issues we looked at in our committee, and it's one that we will, I think, have to come back to, is the issue of bigger players as well, to the bulking up phenomenon and how that is happening and the impact that's having long-term and later on in the lives of many sports people. A number of high-profile concussion incidents at elite and school level have demonstrated that Irish sporting bodies and education institutions need to take concerted, uniform action on the issue around head injuries. A lot of progress has been made to raise awareness of the risks of concussion in sport, but it's also clear to us as a committee that sports concussion presents a growing risk, especially in relation to school children and amateur sports people, be it men and women. We do believe that more can be done and can be achieved by all of the stakeholders involved, pooling their expertise to work on a common strategy across government departments, sporting organisations and education institutions. It is important at amateur level that we develop and work to bring change. There is a lack of good quality data to help us monitor incidents of concussion and to monitor long-term effect of injury at the amateur level. And the committee is very much of the view that we should recommend the compulsory recording of sports-related concussions incidents in schools and sporting activities involving children in line with health and safety and child safety standards. As a matter of principle, any player experiencing or displaying symptoms of concussion should immediately be removed from play, regardless of pitchside assessment, and follow a graduated play to return to play protocol. A more consistent approach is needed to concussion management across sporting codes and schools, and we recommend as a committee the establishment of a government task force to implement the Zurich guidelines in Irish sport. And we very much welcome the fact that the sporting bodies sign up to the Zurich guidelines, but we do believe that there should be uniformity and consistency of approach, and that the task force should include representatives from the medical community, the National Rehabilitation Hospital, Acquired Brain Injury Ireland, and Headway Ireland Department of Health, Children, Youth Affairs, Education and Skills, and representatives from key sporting codes and nominees from Corlin and Nogue. The task force should consider what measures can be taken by the sporting organisations to develop a joint awareness and educational programme on sports concussion, devise standard guidance on concussion diagnosis and return to play protocols for dissemination to players, parents, coaches, medics, schools and sporting organisations, make recommendations on rule changes in specific sporting disciplines in order to minimise the impact of sports-related concussion, along with making recommendations on the appropriate use of protective headgear in certain sports based on up-to-date medical advice. And we also have the view that state funding for sporting organisations should be linked to the completion of sports concussion training courses for referees, medical professionals and coaches. In making our recommendation, the Joint Committee of Health and Children is aware of the fact that sports and concussion is a very complex issue. There are no easy fixes for policymakers or for sporting organisations. However, we do hope, and we are of the view that the Ministers for Health and Children and Youth Affairs will take on board our recommendations, and that we will see this report today being used as a foundation for a radical overhaul of public health policy in the area of sports and concussion. With that, I want to again pay tribute to the sporting organisations and to our medics who came before us, and to thank the members of the committee for their involvement and engagement in the compilation of the report, but in the holding of the hearings. And with that, we'll be happy, those of us in the committee, to take any questions you may have. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Justin.
Just on the whole area of, I suppose, the Zurich recommendations, how far do you think that they can be actually implemented for the professional organisations, such as particularly the provincial club rugby setups?
Well, I suppose, Justin, the first point is that the Zurich guidelines reflect international best practice, as you know quite well. And we did see in some of the autumn internationals where, in particular, the IRFU took a very strong view regarding players who were injured, there was a doubt about them, and that's to be welcomed. And I think, the physical aspect of sport is growing. I referenced about the bulking up part, and if you look at the way rugby has changed as a game, and if I could just make rugby as an example, the tactic has changed maybe now where players run head on as opposed to going wider in the past. So that requires that the Zurich guidelines be implemented across from the schoolboy to the elite player, and that anybody suspected of suffering a concussion be taken away from the field of play immediately. Don't come back to play until they're cleared by a medical practitioner, and that if you take the American model, that's an independent practitioner, not the person who first diagnoses the concussion. And I think it is fair to say that sporting bodies have signed up, have done a lot of work. I think it would be remiss if we didn't say that. Obviously, we have a journey to go. There's a cultural mindset and a cultural change that has to take place. And I think that there is a willingness by sporting bodies and by, in particular, the management at club level and internationally, along with the medics, to change that. And if anyone wants to make any comment?
Just on the issue of bulking up, I raised this during the committee hearings because I have a concern if I'm looking at the issue of children and not as much the professional bodies, but how, particularly in rugby, the sporting heroes are linked to products about bulking up, and therefore encouraging children. And schools will tell you that you see the different school sizes. If you look at the size of the pupils playing rugby, I think anybody who follows rugby, in particular the teams, you will see the schools that potentially there are children using those products. So I have a concern there. And one of the other issues that came up for us was across the sporting disciplines in schools, the need to work together to ensure that the same coherent messages are being given in relation to concussion, so that you don't have a situation where a coach in GAA is given one message and a coach in rugby is given a slight variant but nuanced, but that might make a difference. So I think there is a responsibility on all the sporting bodies to come together and have standard practice when it comes to schools. So whether you're a parent who is refereeing a match or a coach, that you have exactly the same message that you're given.
Yes, well, just to say at the outset that we as a Health and Children Committee are very anxious to add our weight to the encouragement of young people's active participation in sporting activity. But we are very anxious to ensure that the highest safety standards apply. We know that there is significant improvement in relation to professional sport, but in the areas of school and amateur sporting undertakings, there still is room, significant room in some instances for improvement. And it's very, very important that the best possible standards are not only understood but applied. And we know that there are examples of best practice at different school locations and within sporting bodies throughout the country, but there is not a consistency. We have to take on board Professor John Ryan's evidence to the committee. Professor Ryan is a consultant at St Vincent's Hospital, and he highlighted the fact that in the period between the 2012-2013 and 2013-2014 sporting years, sporting calendars, there was a 41% increase in the presentation of young people between the ages of 14 and 18 years with suspected head injuries. Now, we can appreciate that a portion of that, an unknown percentage of that increase, would be attributable to increased awareness and the importance of presenting for expert professional assessment. But it doesn't explain it all. So it clearly, in my view, and the evidence of Professor Ryan, as with others who came before the committee, underscores the need to match increased interest, enthusiasm, and the yearning to do one's best that sport brings out, particularly in young people. We need to match that with all of the possible applied best practices in terms of safety standards. And that is very much at the core of what we're presenting here this morning.
Senator Burke?
I think every sports organisation has made huge improvements over the last number of years, but it's interesting if you look at the acquired brain injury survey in conjunction with the Gaelic Players Association. It identified that 54% of those surveyed said they had been concussed while playing, and I think it just highlights about this is an important issue that needs to be dealt with. But the interesting figure that the survey also showed is that 73% said they were assessed by a medical expert. But it means if 73% were assessed, there was another 27% which were not assessed. And that would be my concern, and to make sure that while a lot of improvements have been made over the last number of years, that we continue to work towards those improvements, and that we have a broad agreement across all sports of one set of standards as regards how we deal with this issue. And I think that's the important thing. Regardless of what the sport is, it's one set of standards apply as regards making sure we have medical assessment, and that all of those standards are followed through by whether it's a voluntary organisation or whether people are playing in a professional capacity. And I think that's the reason why it's so important that the task force is set up.
Yeah, this is just a report at the moment.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're going to give this to the Minister for Children and Youth Affairs.
And the Minister.
You're recommending a task force. And one of the most important recommendations is the compulsory recording of such injuries. For people like looking at this programme or recording, when do you see practical measures coming out of all of this?
Well, I would hope that, first of all, arising from today, we will present the report to the Ministers for Health, Children and Youth Affairs, along with the Minister for Sport. We will lay it before the House of Oireachtas. We will seek a debate in the House on a report. We will then also, I think as an urgency, engage further with the sporting bodies with a view to seeing this task force within, hopefully, the lifetime of this DAL being established. I think the timeline is important to put it out there for discussion, first of all. Secondly, to ensure that this won't just sit on a shelf. We have, as I said, to be fair, received huge buy-in and support and cooperation from the sporting bodies. That has to be put on the record. Yeah. There's a willingness from a cross-party perspective from all of us in the Oireachtas to ensure that the welfare of the young player or of the elite sports person, or indeed the person who doesn't engage in sport, who has an injury in the playground in school, is looked after. And we have a duty of care. So it's a matter of priority for us. That's why we've held this piece of work, this body of work around this report, so that we can highlight the issue to ensure that we have uniformity. And ultimately it's up to government to act upon a report, but we will be pursuing government on this. In the committee, as a rule, I have to say that there is a very strong cross-party support on many issues, and we work together on issues to bring to government. In some cases we get results, other cases we don't. We have a collaborative approach more than any other committee, I would say, in terms of issues. So from our perspective, this is about ensuring that the duty of care to the sports person, to be the young child or the young person active in sport, and that we as a committee are proactive as legislators in promulgating and highlighting the issues around concussion in sport.
Do you see this task force getting funding from the government? Already you have major sports such as rugby and football GA who have money, who do look after the elite players, but we're talking about under that, and that will require money. So do you envisage funding going to this task force when it's set up?
I would personally hope that it will. Yeah. The task force, to me, will enable the sporting organisations and the broader society to develop joint educational awareness programmes, to develop standard guidance on concussion diagnosis, along with the return to play protocols. And I think the important point is that it will recommend rule changes, to minimise the impact of concussion, but also it's about awareness. It's about creating that sense of urgency that perhaps is not there, that hasn't percolated down to some level of the club, whether it's in West Cork or in Donegal or wherever. So our job today is twofold. One is to encourage greater research into the topic. One is to highlight the issue around concussion, and I suppose thirdly is to make sure that there's a consistency of approach in the application of the Zurich guidelines, along with the fact that we believe a task force should be established so that we can receive, further awareness, further research, and further progress or progression on the issues. Anyone come in?
And I think for us also the collection of data, that was an issue that came up again and again from us from the different sporting disciplines, was actually having Irish data that we could look at. We could look at other countries and maybe draw a reference, but we very much saw the need to have data that was Irish data that we could then drive forward. So that for us was a big issue.
Deputy Byrne, Catherine Byrne.
It's just I'll stand because I have to say myself as well. Just on, this is the first step as far as I'm concerned as a committee is this. It goes further than just this report. It goes to, as somebody who played League of Ireland soccer for a number of years as a woman, how important it is that the people at the hierarchy and the people on the pitch, and above all the people who referee matches, take control of the game. We had a terrible sad incident there a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, a young cricket player in Australia killed, even though he had a helmet. And I believe it's up to those people who are, whether they're local managers or teams, managers to any kind of sport, have the responsibility to make sure that a sport is played within a certain ruling and that those rules are set down from the start of the whistle goes. And I think at the end of the day what it will do is it'll also make sure to the players that there's an actual channel that can be gone through once an injury is occurred, and that's what the report is about. It's about highlighting the injuries and making sure that there's statistics there to back up what needs to be done. It is only a first step, and I know part of the process in the hearings on it was we heard from very relevant people, and particularly the young lad who came in at one stage and spoke to us. I was very impressed with what he had to say as well. So I just want to say I welcome the report, and as soon as this committee is set up, the better. Thanks.
There was a phrase used during the hearings about the weekend warrior, and we want to reach out to that player, that amateur sports person who perhaps isn't the elite player, isn't the inter-county player, so that we can ensure that in many cases they're the ones who are most affected, and we must ensure that they receive the information and it's the same treatment as your inter-county player or your elite sports person. But we need to move from the concept or the viewpoint that it's the international player, it's the elite sports person, it's the inter-county player. It's not. It's the person who plays every Saturday or Sunday morning. The junior B player or So it's about reaching out to every sports person across a multifaceted approach.
But I think, and also we found it's also about the evidence, because one of the issues you might naturally think is headgear would protect you, but certainly in our findings that is not natural. It depends on the sporting discipline that you're looking at, because headgear may also lead somebody to feel that they can really barge through because they have this protective headgear, and it doesn't necessarily protect you against concussion. So we want to ensure that as we move forward, we do it based on the evidence. Katie Taylor just won the most popular sports person in Ireland today. She wears headgear in boxing where the men don't wear headgear in boxing. It's a conundrum amongst boxers. They don't understand why that is there. Can you shed any light on why there's a difference there between the sexes?
I can't.
No, I don't.
No,
I'm
but
not an expert on boxing.
But I think there is a need to create awareness around the issue of the use of protective headgear. There is as Senator Van Turner said, there is a perception that the scrum cap will protect you. It won't. The hurling helmet has compulsory in hurling. It has minimised the level of damage, the level of injury. We've heard from Horse Racing Ireland. We've heard from boxing. And there is, I think, a greater need to delve further into how we can protect all sports people, whether it's the boxer, whether it's the show jumper, whether it's the jockey, or whether it's the hurler or footballer or rugby player or soccer player. And I think, everything isn't perfect, but there has been huge progress. Absolutely. And the evolution of how things have changed is to be welcomed. And I have to say, we have found from all the sporting organisations tremendous willingness to cooperate, to engage, and to look at themselves objectively. And not to say everything is perfect in our area. And they've been very honest with us. And even in private and in public, I have to commend all the sporting organisations. And unfortunately, we've had people who've lost lives. That's regrettable. It's because of the trauma and the tragedy of those events that we have, embarked on this journey, so that we can ensure that all sports people and all sporting organisations don't become complacent, don't become arrogant in how they handle the issue of concussion and head injuries, because it is about the quality of life that can be ended or that can be severely impaired or affected. And that's why, as a body of work, we have put forward this report with a view to raising awareness, seeking resources, and also creating an awareness and educational platform around it.
Can I just say something with regard to the boxing? We actually found during the hearings that with the boxing, they actually have extremely strict protocols and they're very much adhered to. So the question with regard to the scrum cap or not, it may be just a personal choice, because we had heard from others that the headgear don't necessarily protect you from concussion.
Senator Buck?
Yeah, I think one of the other things as well about setting clear guidelines and standards about when players can be put back on. At the moment, managers come under pressure from individuals about putting a player back on. The manager's judgment is that the player should not go back on. At the moment, he can say, well, okay, we have an individual, standard within the organisation. But if there's a common standard, then they can use that as the protection for not putting a player back on, where they have a doubt themselves. Where the problem at the moment is that that's not there, and I think that's extremely important to give the managers the criteria as well, that they know that these are the rules, and I'm not going to bend or breach those rules in any way. And I think that's the reason why we need to set up a common standard across all sports.
Just on the Zurich guidelines, do you feel that the pitch side assessment, does that go far enough from what you found throughout the hearings?
Well, I suppose, Justin, I cited the example of the internationals in the autumn where players were taken off and didn't come back on. We've seen not a uniformity of approach in the application of the Zurich guidelines. And as a consequence of that, what we're saying is that despite the huge progress being made across all sporting organisations, there needs to be a common approach to education, to awareness, to treatment of. And as a consequence, we're saying that the task force would galvanise around that, would bring the sporting bodies together, would allow a platform, would allow a forum in which this can be discussed and how we can move to have that consistency of approach. Because it is important that we have the consistency of approach, because if we don't, it'll be piecemeal, and that applies to schools as well. It applies to, to me, if you look at what we did, if you look at the issue around the pitch side concussion assessment, which was launched in professional rugby in 2012, that's a welcomed initiative. It's worked well. It's reduced the number of concussed players returning to play. And I suppose the key point is that we keep missing at times is that the concussion is a complex issue. It isn't, that one that it may not present immediately. So therefore, that's why we think it's important that there is a consistency, and that the adherence has been mixed, we have found in our report, to the application of the guidelines. So for us, it's about ensuring that all sporting bodies sign up to this, that we have a uniformity of approach and a consistency that puts the centre and at the centre the player or the sports person, and that we can have the care of the sports person, be the child or the young adolescent or the amateur sports person, at the centre of what we do. And I think there is a willingness by the sporting bodies to engage in this. They've been, as I said, and I keep stressing this point, very cooperative, very engaged with us. And I just hope that we can get to the point where we will have this task force set up, where we can have this further movement in the protection of players and the education of mentors, referees, which is happening as well in many different areas.
The key, I suppose, of state funding for sporting organisations, that seemed quite an interesting recommendation to the task force, that if training isn't engaged in, that there is that threat there that funding may be withheld or even withdrawn. How realistic do you think that actually is when it comes down to the distribution of those state capital grants?
Well, I would hope that the Sports Council, the Department of Sport, in the case of sport or whichever department it is, we have a duty of care. We're public health advocates, we're legislators, we're members of the Oireachtas. Sporting bodies are charged with and responsible for the care of their sports person, no matter who they are. So I think there's a duty, there's an obligation to, and I think it's important that we understand that this is about the protection of the player, and also that we ensure that this is about the sporting bodies saying, yes, we take our responsibility seriously. We have done certain things up to now. We're pursuing, education about many issues. But for me and for us as a committee, it's about ensuring that the awareness, the protocols, and the proper management of concussion are appropriately and properly prioritised by sporting organisations. And we make this recommendation not in a sort of a zealous kind of way, but in a way that we link it to the fact that in order to fulfil criteria, this is one that you will have to fulfil to receive funding.
Sorry, there would also be a legal duty in that case if there was clear standards set out and these were recommended and it was recommended by the task force and adopted by government, then there would be a legal duty on government to make sure that any funding they're given, that the organisations getting funding are complying with those standards. So there would be a legal obligation in the government department as well about funding.
I want to welcome Deputy Dan Neville and Deputy Peter Fitzpatrick as well to the launch. Do you want to, you okay?
No.
Okay. In Keshara? Okay. Deputy Fitzpatrick, yeah?
Yeah, just a wee thing.
Peter is a former manager of the Louth Inter-County football team, so just...
the thing about sports in Ireland at the moment is...
Do you want to face the audience?
Yeah. Well, the thing I find about sports at the moment is there's an awful lot of amateurs, and people are going to have to realise there's an awful lot of non-elite amateur people at the moment. Now, this thing at the moment is, I think we turn into play. As a former Gaelic footballer and a former manager myself at the moment is, there's a lot of ego out there with players at the moment. And I think most sports in Ireland have some kind of contact. So I'm just trying to say at the moment is, I think managers, doctors, clubs have to take responsibility here at the moment, and also parents at the moment is, that when two people collide together and concussion occurs, the first impression is that as the manager, it's putting pressure on that player to whack on again. The second impact could cause swelling and serious damage to that person at the moment. So listen, as myself, a non-elite addict, it's very, very important that we don't put pressure on these people to go back on the field there at the moment. And I think education has to come into it, awareness has to come into it at the moment. And I think it's very, very important that we all work closely there together. And this thing of pressure on managers to win at all costs at the moment, I've been unlucky there for the last number of months there. I booked my hip there 6 months ago there at the moment, and I realised myself, you're lying down in the bed there at the moment, and you're trying to get yourself back up and running again. There's pressure on putting yourself to get yourself back. But I'm trying to say concussion is a very, very, very serious thing in sport at the moment, and I think we all have to take some kind of responsibility of it. And I can't emphasise enough that we have to stop putting pressure on players who has concussion to go back on the field and win at all costs. Thank you.
I should just make one point that we were very struck by the testimony of Michael Darragh Macaulay, who was the acquired brain injury champion at the committee, and he made a very strong testimony about how he as a player had been affected by concussion. And I just, I think it is important that we acknowledge that he came into the committee and spoke very honestly and very eloquently. If we want to get a couple of closing remarks, Deputy Credon.
Yes, well, just one piece of information that was shared with us, and repeatedly so, and that is about the false sense of security that some so-called safety wear gives to parents and children, and very particularly in relation to headgear. Many people, and many parents certainly, would believe that the headgear worn protects against concussion. It's not the case. It's not the case. In fact, in nearly all, if not all, they're really only protecting the scalp. Where there's an impact even with the headgear on, concussion is still in prospect. It's very, very important that people know that, and that young people are conscious of it, and that it doesn't lead to excessive risk taking, that people can still enjoy the game, can still perform to the highest possible standard, but not on the basis of a sense of false security. And it is important that that message gets out. Thank you.
I suppose just in conclusion, just to say that in the context of sport, it's the weekend warriors, I said, and the school children where we need to reach out to further, because there's obviously focus of attention on the professional or the inter-county or the elite sports person, and just to thank Professor Ryan for his cooperation with us, and Maria Mones from the Department of Health. Just to put on record, by the way, the GA have a 13-page protocol, and the IRFU have a very strong education programme, and I think for those who are interested, it's worth talking to the IRFU and to the GA on what they're actually doing about the issue of concussion, because to be fair to them, they are going down to the club level. I was very struck personally by the IRFU education programme in regard to the fact that they had over 2,000 people attending 54 concussion roadshows, and that does show that they're taking the responsibility seriously, and I want to just pay tribute to the G and the IRFU for the work that they're doing, and indeed to all sporting organisations. We can never allow a situation that we can have people become complacent. We have seen lives tragically lost. We need to educate, prioritise the welfare of all players, and learn from what happened in the past to ensure that this report is the launching pad, is the beginning of another journey in the management of players. And indeed, that's one that we take seriously. It requires a sustained national collaborative campaign. It involves the schools, sporting clubs, and it involves us educating and raising awareness, and it involves the players themselves as well, taking their responsibility, and as Michael Darragh said, not wanting to rush in to win the match, because as you know quite well, that doesn't necessarily happen, and it can lead to huge repercussions. And what we want to see happen is to ensure that there's awareness around concussion, and that there are clear protocols put in place and how it can be dealt with. Any final remarks from anyone?
Yeah, just for me, an important issue is that it does filter down to the schools, and that we have a consistent message. And I think there is a role, we certainly saw it through the committee hearings, that the sporting bodies have really made great strides. But what we need to do is ensure that there's a consistent approach at schools. So pitch side, whatever the sport, parents know, because very often parents are being put into the spot of refereeing a match, that parents know what to do as well. So the training really filters down through wherever in Ireland a game is happening.
And I would hope that Acquired Brain Injury Ireland, through the Acquired Brain Injury champion like Michael Darragh Macaulay, that could be used as the template that we can get other players involved and other sports people involved to raise that awareness. So with that, can I thank you for being here? Any other questions? Are we all okay? Okay, listen, can I thank you very much. Can I wish you all a very happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year, and hopefully that we'll have a very good sporting 2015. Gramaga.
Thank you.
Thank you.